Hello everyone, today we start a brand new series dedicated to Indo-European theology, in the sacred tapestry which the divine essence of motion weaves a profound narrative, threading through the celestial and terrestrial realms. It's essentially about the doctrine of the two natures, binding the cosmos in a dance of the elements, fire, water, and spirit, in ways we will describe now, basing ourselves on compared Indo-Europeistics, given that the very languages that we speak were conceived by our ancestors as a veritable description of the cosmical sounds, right, of the broader physical and metaphysical events in the universe that literally are, as we'll learn through the etymologies and properly the phonetics, there's very specific sounds, syllables, that we still use in all the words we're using simply straightforward right now. We'll see it's not an arcane, hidden thing. And this is somewhere I wanted to get from a very long time. I spent my decent amount of time looking at these things on top of my sort of historical religious studies that I carry on for now several years, that finally provide us with this quite unique kind of approach, blending linguistics with mythology, on top of what we know very well about the imperial Catholic tradition and beyond. So the theology we're talking about, I will not make a broader premise. If anything, I will make at some point one video to explain this better, but I just want to try this as there's going to be tens of such lessons, right? But of course, it is important to understand what we are discussing in a broader sense. And theology is rooted, in this sense, in the primordial vibration of existence, of life itself, finding its expression, in this case, in the sacred syllable, because this was a sacred language. Remember, it described the heavens, right? And so in the doctrine of the two natures, the perennial and fully existing in hyper-real dimension, as opposed to our fallen, earthly one, right? So today we'll look in particular of this tortuous zigzagging motion of the divine spark expressed by the sacred syllable Ag, right? The lightning bolt that pierces the heavens and dances among the waters, right? In Genesis, that's literally how things begin. By the way, this is for saying that, of course, we framed this in terms of Indo-European theology, but this was universal wisdom, right? And that's also one of the most challenging aspects of the wall. People often, I have encountered them over time, deny essentially the existing of such actual body of doctrines for reasons that are, say, at least explainable in the difficulties that we have, first of all, as a culture, but also, of course, in the relatively limited amount of information that we have. Unfortunately, historiography mostly goes by, if something is not explicitly said, you must not just doubt of it, but ipso facto it does not exist. In other words, everything that is not demonstrated, not just it can't be believed in, regardless of, we made a famous video on Peterson's what do you mean by believe, which is actually, regardless of Peterson's limitations in tradition, unfortunately, a pretty significant aspect. But this thing should neither exist. It should be denied and canceled, right? We know that tradition has been properly canceled at a point in our history, not even just in big ways. Surely it was wanted in this regard, but simply just out of forgetfulness, right? Literally, we came out of this frame, and we basically didn't do anything in order to train ourselves into understanding its broader meaning. So again, I will not specifically digress on this topic. If anything, we will have lots of things to discuss today. As opposed to that, at some point I will make an overall video to explain where I'm coming from. But this series is, in my opinion, fantastic because I managed to finally blend in both the linguistic and the mythological evidence that are fully literary in this sense, right? Fully studied by linguists, by also like just by anthropologists. It's a bigger thing. And mythology is actually written and it can be interpreted also in archetypal ways, etc. But we're basing ourselves on the actual words, on the actual letters of Indo-European language that describes the same mythology, as we will see now. Naturally, there is a different level of documentation for different peoples at different times. The Vedas will have historically, as you know, in the Indo-European texts, the lion's share for different reasons, but we will see how this connects with the Western branch of the Indo-Europeans, and I'm going to make also more history of religion videos about, if anything, the broader Iranian world. We will talk about, yesterday we talked about the sagas, for example, from a military standpoint, but we will widen pretty far this whole horizon, which was in fact the broader Indo-European one coming from the steppes. If anything, I can also make some videos about the actual steppes, sort of the waves of Indo-European conquest in Europe that is quite relevant also to date, to have an idea essentially even how our language came into being, right? Not just from the steppes, but also in Europe. So, starting with the Rig Veda, 1091-2, the syllable Agni is explicitly linked to the cosmic motion of, you can't guess that if you think about the major forces in the Vedic horizon, Agni himself, Agni, described as, in fact, the tortuous path of the flame itself that weaves through the three words earth, atmosphere, and heavens. This tripartition is crucial because it doesn't just reflect of course, the broader Indo-European one, but as we've seen in different videos, including the traditional conception of space, it shouldn't be understood in a simply sort of physicistic way, right? The earth represents the fallen world, and so the lower nature, the eternally degenerating one. The atmosphere, in this sense, is actually something in between, right? You could consider it as part of the earth in a naturalistical sense, but it's not quite meant like that. It's a in-between, where also men act, and specifically sacred royalty does, eternally rising as the king of the living and rising to divinity, where the heavens stand. So you can make the case that the sun, for example, that is exactly connected with sacred royalty as the Sol Invictus, perpetually rises yet again. And what we're looking at this in Agni is the tortuous path of the flame, essentially across these two natures, or these two dimensions. As it is part, in a sense, of the atmosphere itself, or at least it crosses it, and as we'll see now, not just interconnects all these realms, or better, the two realms, but is in this sense the proof that there is no hypostatization in Indo-Europeistics between heaven and earth, meaning that even though these two, rather than worlds, literally natures are divided, they are in a essential sense or in a hyper-essential sense, but not because they do not, in fact, do not have a point of contact between one another. No, this is just a punctiform one. This depends on how you understand provenance as well, but the point is that the two natures constantly inform, or better, the heavenly one constantly informs the lower one, right? And Agni himself is sacred fire. Also made a video about the meaning of Vesta's fire that is obviously connected with this Agni ignis in Latin is fire. We'll see this better. This is kind of obvious. There are striking similarities between, of course, Sanskrit and Latin, and it's not a coincidence, obviously enough. He is truly not just the flame in the sense of sacred fire, but the same divine grace, the same imperium, or the same Holy Ghost, right? To the ancient Indo-Europeans, this was no mere linguistic construct as a whole, but a revelation of the divine will. The sound ag literally expresses, as we will see now, phonetically speaking, this proromptant act of the Holy Ghost breaking through in the lower world and informing it. A cosmic principle embodied, in the case of the Vedas, of course, in the god Agni. The radiant flame, who as apāṃ-napāt, so son of the waters, remember this, emerges from the celestial deluge to illuminate the world with his fiery, sinuous path. Right. The reason why this fire is connected, so in this eminently Apollonian dimension, to the waters, is a bit like the same concept of why the hero emerges from the lower aspect. The lower aspect is contained within the world. There can't be a full divine achievement without the preparation phase, the full possession and taming of the lower basis through which this force can actually rise up to heaven as well. So in the moment in which this cosmic force manifests, it actually it's a bit like saying that God that Christ is the Son of Man, right? What does it mean? God is the Son of Man himself then? Yes, conceptually, if you understand, of course, the doctrine of the Holy Trinity and how it works. There is an additional aspect of this, of course, that is to say, the thundering storm. The fire, the bolt, the lightning, comes out of this cosmic struggle, right, and manifests itself in this flashy. We will see now literally the zigzag movement of the lightning is exactly what Ag means in Indo-European. All right, it's this breaking through this mess and emerging from that condensation of waters in the atmosphere. And forces, of course, of different kind within the same. So imagine, in this sense, out of the darkness, because that's what the waters actually represent. Remember this, that in the ancient Indo-European language, nu is the term that not just basically looks at, defines the darkness, but defines specifically the fact that the ancients believed that darkness was caused by a liquid, a water, a sort of odor, which is, if you study the Thales of Miletus, the idea of the origin from the water, etc. That's that primarily nocturnal dimension that prevents you from seeing. So no, in Indo-European languages, actually derives from this, because when these hunters went out there in the night, imagine the wolf pack of brotherly, say, of sacred brotherhoods during night raids, etc. says, "What do you see?" The answer was nu, which means no, but it means literally what I see is not. It's like there is nothing to see, or the darkness is actually real. The darkness is just something like a filter, let's say, a barrier that prevents me from seeing the actual light, right? And so when victory strikes, it's just like a thundering bolt. This manifests in this violent fashion. Obviously, the lower nature is the dimension of the waters at the lowest sky, right? It's properly the darkness. And so that's how divinity manifests through Jupiter tonans, right, down to Earth. The Atharva Veda 11.5.12 further elaborates that apāṃ-napāt is born from the cosmic waters, apas, his fiery form emerging from the primordial ocean itself, the samudra. Remember, it's a primordial ocean. It's not necessarily an earthly one, that it's actually consubstantial to, but it is the let's say the idea of a disorder that is united by divinity during the act of creation itself, signifying, in this sense, the apāṃ-napāt as dual nature, as both fire and water, in a sense, of the capacity of transfiguring the lower element into the highest one. All right, this is incredibly important. In the Vedic hymns of the Aryans, Agni is the divine fire, the lightning that rides through the sky, its jagged arcs tracing the sacred geometry of the cosmos. All right, this is a universal cosmic fire. It's not merely a thunderbolt. It's literally the manifestation of God in himself. And the marks that this leaves in the heavens is, of course, like any celestial body that you can think of, representing that fire. Of course, being part of a naturalistically fallen nature, is, however, that spark of divinity manifesting and tracing, of course, like the direction that you must follow, including the same language from which that is derived from such concept, and the one that we're discussing. His name, derived from the primordial root Ag, signifies the tortuous motion of the divine, explicitly attested in the Satapatha Brahmana 6.1.3.10, where Agni's zigzag motion is likened to the, quote, serpentine path of the divine spark. Right? It's properly a tortuous, flexus, sinuous. It depends. It can be broken. It can be an angle, as we'll see now, because believe it or not, angle contains that ag, right? From Latin, we'll see it now, that it refers exactly to this primordial principle. See how close actually these terms are. How many scientists know what the term, how many mathematicians, many people studying geometry know what angle means, right? Imagine that, like the language that describes what is often used by some people, as at least in denying the existence of God through an alleged opposition between religion and science, actually is a religious term with quite straightforward divine meaning. All right. Importantly enough, Agni's zigzag motion animates the sacrificial altar. We explained in different videos about the traditional meaning of the patriciate, and in the sense the patriarchate, how the altar, the officiation of rites, is this crucially directing moment in which the officiant is not merely offering something to God. That's the lower, deterior concept that we have sort of understood. It was also in antiquity was had forgotten the original to some extent, at least, because it was actually known at the time, up to very late. But it had to do with the direction of this sacred fire, meaning that, again, things were not happening as if, God. We also explained this in the video about the noumena in Latin, in Roman religion. This force is literally handled during the sacrifice that mimics the cosmic order itself. It's not merely a magic formula, it's the guy officiating the sacrifice, the rite, that is wielding this power through his sheer virtue, right? And so it's as if literally the sacred ruler was handling this divine power, which is exactly the same concept of the descent of the Holy Ghost and the handling that is by the hero through the imperium, by wielding the imperium himself, right? This is incredibly obvious and notorious for anybody who has a minimal understanding of Indo-Europeistics. Now, a movement, the one of the procession of the Holy Ghost, it is neither linear nor predictable, at least from a strictly human perspective. It is mostly just through he who is suspended in between the two natures. All right, there is. We explained that the sacred royalty is defined in a dimension that is in between, and that is distant both from gods and men, according to the sacred texts, and that therefore it represents the atmosphere through which the same zigzag serpentine trajectory of grace passes, because the guy who handles this is still in between. Is not God himself, so it's not perfect. Of course, this crossing, by the way, this descent of the Holy Ghost that obviously crowns the virtuous ruler, still must descend into an imperfect world. Hence, right, this non-linear nor predictable look at this for the way we fundamentally experience it, right? Again, we should talk a bit more about traditional theology to substantiate better the explanation, but again, we make lots of videos. We don't have all the time in the world, unfortunately, and so I am partially just sticking to this like that. For example, just speaking of phonetics, the serpent aga, you have the same syllable here, of Sanskrit lore, slithers through the world's currents. Remember the connection with the waters, and of course with the Ouroboros and this chthonic dimension of the cosmic force that can be, it's sort of double-edged, right? You must be able to tame it, but it's this trajectory is sinuous exactly because it's inherent to this lower world that is represented by the serpent, the lowest element, the most chthonic force of all, that is still, however, animated by, of course, divine power, because there is no other source of power but God. The Taittiriya Samhita 2.5.1.3 describes Aga as a cosmic serpent whose undulating motion mirrors the flow of Soma in rituals as well, right? Connecting the earthly and the divine. So the Soma itself, there, of course, is this fiery substance representing the Holy Ghost itself, is the same, is perturbed, is at least manifesting in the same forms as long as the world where it's in fact instantiated is imperfect, but it's still very much part of the higher nature. The same serpentine essence resonates in the Celtic Nathair, the snake that coils through the midst of the Giles, embodying the unpredictable flow of life's energy, as evidenced in the Lebor Gabalaeren, where the Nathair is associated with the sacred springs guarded by druidic rites, symbolizing the life-giving flow of divine energy. Right, so it's as if you could mediate, in fact, the manifestation of power, literally giving life yourself, redeeming, right? It's just like when the commander is able to truly control his and guide his men's military action as a sole power akin to the one of God that is literally the medium of through this aga. And in the Germanic Nadro, the viper that twists through the northern forests, a symbol of the divine's elusive motion is also present. So a meaning that you must somehow be at the constant search of, because it's the key to it. It's just like, I don't know, the symbolism of Saint George and the dragon, right? You must slay the dragon in order to get a higher wisdom, right? Which is exactly connected with the in that sense with an imperfect, a lower kind that, however, has a type of power that is fearsome, is dangerous, and only the hero can truly slay and make his own. The Old Norse Voluspa, stanza 52, references the Nadro as a creature of Yggdrasil's roots, its twisting form embodying the cyclical motion of cosmic renewal. The Old Church Slavonic gade, meaning serpent, echo is the aga. It's writing from a testament to the sacred zigzag that Agni traces across the heavens. In the Slavic primary chronicle, the gade is noted as a guardian of sacred groves, its serpentine form linked to the deity Veles, who navigates the underworld's currents. Right, so it all adds up. These are not mere words, but manifestations of a shared Indo-European vision, in fact, where the divine moves in curves and angles, right? Also, difficultly prescrutable ones, right? Just when the thunders are out there, you're in the darkness, you're scared. Actually, I'm excited when that happens. But it's a moment in which you take shelter, in which you're not there. It's the primordial chaos that is remanifested. And so you must really attain a higher degree of awareness in order to properly understand and grasp what is being traced by the heavens. We see this also in the Hellenic gonia, in Latin angulus, right? They literally derive from ga, both meaning angle, reflecting the sacred corners where the divine path bends and shifts, we were hinting at before. The Hellenic term gonia is used in Hesiod's Theogony, line 746, to describe the angular paths of divine winds. I would like to stress how specific this whole body the doctrinal body is, right? So what I was saying before, the fact that something is not explicitly illustrated by a same source in the wall doesn't mean that everything doesn't add up. And Indo-Europeistics in its comparative dimension is obviously the ABC also for any other sort of previous, like history does not begin literally with people explaining to you more or less what happened so that you can contemporarily say, oh, well, I believe it or I don't believe it. Nobody cares about you. You are completely irrelevant in the cosmos unless you're able to make a synthesis out of this world through the actual domination of a wider universal knowledge. The Latin angulus appears in Varro's De Lingua Latina 7.7 as the turning points in sacred land boundaries. This is very important because you know that the Romans had a pretty advanced agrimensural techniques, also in part inherited by the Etruscans, that also were heavily informed by, if they weren't Indo-Europeans, that were heavily informed by that as well. All concepts that aligned with the divine geometry of Indo-European thoughts. Right, just for the record, if you look at Roman Europe and beyond, by the way, terrains tracing the same, also cities' foundations, the cardon, the decumanus, the angles, the angulus, was properly conceived, of course, aligned with the astronomical axis. We talked about the same centrality of Rome in not just in the history of mankind, but in universal metaphysics, and we'll come back on that, and why, of course, all of this was just like the pomerium as a perimeter, of course, divinely created, right, established, hence sacralizing the world, and as with Rome, like with the capacity of transfiguring the entire universe in the imperial accomplishment. Agni's motion, as the Vedic texts proclaim, as the eagle looks at God in the sky when he makes these strails descending, together with, of course, the wind glory that is the Victoria herself. Agni's motion, as the Vedic texts proclaim, is not merely physical, but obviously spiritual as well, journey through the waters of creation, where he's both born and sustained, right? It's not a mere sort of flash. It's a forever instantiated action, right, of cosmic world order. The Yajurveda 1711 describes Agni's birth in the waters as a cosmic churning, the manthana, where his fiery essence emerges from the friction of divine forces as a spark proper, right? The root ag aligns with ga and gam in Indo-European languages, verbs of going and walking. Literally, going, it derives from that, right? It's as straightforward. In the European soul, this obviously denotes the pilgrimage of the spirit through the cosmos, right? So going literally comes from the primordial millennia old meaning of properly the procession of the Holy Ghost from God, right? And do I need to add else? Really, this is our world. In the Avestan Yasna 43.5, the old Iranian equivalent ga is used to describe the going forth specifically of the divine soul, the Fravashi, toward Aura Mazda, paralleling the Vedic concept of spiritual motion. This is quite interesting because it shows in a perfectly trinitary fashion that, as we were saying before, it's not just the procession of the Holy Ghost from God, but obviously the instantiation of the Holy Ghost in the hero, in the Son, that returns to God into one. Hence, also the deeper meaning of the Trinity. In Sanskrit, gati is the sacred movement of all that lives. To begin with, that's what we've seen also in this lower chthonic beings, right? So it's not merely a matter. This confuses every Gnosticism. There isn't such thing like two different gods battling against one another. There's only one source of power, right? Only God. And this is extremely clear in the Indo-Europeistics. That's also why Gnostics were properly exterminated for witchcraft way before Christianity came around by all the great Catholic empires in history, right? And I like to make that meme. If you don't know what Catholic means and you think that Catholicism did not exist before Christianity, well, bad, because this is also one of the few things that actually priests tell correctly about this fundamental aspect of Catholic tradition. Besides, we have all kind of here, that's why it's beautiful to compare the Indo-Europeanistics is concerned, because all these vocabularies reflect the same identical knowledge. All people want to make you believe that there were different cultures, also had different ideas. It's a gigantic pile of BS. They all believe the same identical thing, right, since ever. Ga is mirrored in the Celtic gaite, that is the wind that carries the breath of the gods. Noted in the Irish choir and man as the divine wind that animates the soul during heroic quests. That is the Imperium, and so the transfigured soul of the Lord, of the Son of the Waters, that becomes the Son of God, the Son of Heaven himself. The Germanic Gangan, to go forth with purpose, right? We've seen this roots, regardless of different languages. For example, we've seen it how in Egyptian, the concept of the Sol Invictus that constantly rises is also the Sol Invictus that constantly advances, all right? Because, again, I'm using different terms, but the Sol Invictus, by the way, was not the late Roman thing that spawns at some point, according of how you have been. We know of the Sol Invictus centuries before Christ in Sabina, in central Italy. People literally must open their eyes. This is sort of basic knowledge nowadays. Like, we know it pretty well, pretty explicitly. It's so silly to still see the world the way we do, right? And of course, this advance, this proceeding, is what you see in ancient art, with the hero riding the chariot, with, of course, the heavenly glory in front of him as an eagle, as an angel. Angel is connected with that, by the way, with the same root, and God, as basically he is God himself, is becoming God, but above, right, the sun. And so it's this continuous rise and advancing of the heroes of old wandering in search of divine favor, like the errant Indo-European knights that took over our lands. The Anglo-Saxon Beowulf, line 1357, uses Gangan to describe the hero's purposeful journey to confront Grendel, imbued with divine intent. The Slavic idthi, to walk, shares the sacred rhythm. Some words, naturally, some phonetics was corrupted over time just by spoken practice, but we know that these terms actually all derive from the original root, right? We can't look at all the sort of philological, etymological side of the story here, but you can check it if you want and see how they actually connect, right? The fact that this is a rhythm is very important because it's a procession, it's a timing, it's a cycle, it's a cosmic order, right? Just like the waves of Indo-European conquerors. There's a time for everything, and the paths that the Holy Ghost will find it are relatively unpredictable, at least to the fallen human, right? Not to the victorious hero that, very much against any Protestant heresy, is actually bending. He's making his own law. Destiny is simply the will to power of the hero in his providentially divine mission, right, that he creates himself. And so, in any case, whether, of course, we're looking from always a falling kind, there's a steady or erratic progression, but still towards the divine. If you look at the root ga from the human standpoint. In the Slavic Byliny, idthi is used for the epic journeys of bogatyrs like Ilya Muromets, whose travels are guided by divine omens. These roots converge in the theology of Yagat, the Sanskrit world, where all that lives, the Ya, moves Gat, right? So Yagat, and this is incredibly important because, again, it reconfirms the God as the only source of power in the universe. And manifesting, it is cosmic dance, that, again, in an individual fallen fashion we can't fully embrace, but that we learn to sort of dance along with, augments your power and aligns you with cosmic harmony and the manifestation of divine through your very soul. A universal procession led, of course, in Vedic religion by Agni's flame, right? It's the flame that guides that, to which the Ag, literally of Agni, is one. Hence Yagat. Everything that lives moves. And again, God doesn't, because God is just the source of this, and everything that moves in this sense, it's because it has, in some ways, either to come closer, to come actually close to God. You see, there can't be any movement that is not attemptedly heading toward that direction. Whether it succeeds or not doesn't matter. At some point, if you die, you simply dissolve, right, in the lower nature. In the perennial one, God it's just like in Aristotle, in Thomistics, the unmoved mover, that just like in the Taoistic Wei Wu Wei, moving without moving, right, because all power emanates from that. The Mahabharata 3:221-23 defines Yagat, so all that lives moves, as the living world in motion itself, where Agni's flame drives the cyclical renewal of existence at the same time. Because remember that this force is constantly reviving. All right, it's just like what in Christianity you say in terms of, you can't be always forgiven. There isn't such a thing like an exhaustion of divine power. It's just you who has to be worth of it and be recompensated through your works by grace, right? The way you fail is because you're not enough, not because, in that sense, divine power is not there, you can't access it. It's all your fault if you fail, in other words. The consonant cluster G, like GH, elevates this theology, blending G's tortuous motion with H's divine trust in the Indo-European language. This is incredibly important. So in Aga, you can say the G stands for the actual convoluted movement, while the H is literally the actual trust, right? Hence, phonetic combination, meaning a sacred push or pressure that propels the cosmos itself forward. Because what is the cosmos otherwise? The Avestan Gathas 31:7 describe the GH sound as the forceful breath of creation. Right? In other words, God inspires himself in the form of the Holy Ghost. And it's just, say, the fallen world resistance that obviously is unable to fully attain divinity. And so it gets just as much energy as it's really worth, all right? This forceful breath of creation, think about the pneuma in the biblical translation in Greek, links it to the divine act of shaping the world through dynamic motion, right? This is the deeper meaning. Say when God sort of blew on Adam, there is a deeper, not quite literalistic interpretation of that, right? In explaining how life emerges, how life takes shape and form. Right. Naturally, the Indo-European spiritual view of this is that they both happen at the same time from both sides. Right. Of course, in the Semitic world, there was sort of older and more exhausted. This is more like a passive action that man sort of receives. But the actual meaning, also in the Bible originally, is not quite that. Unfortunately, most people do not quite get exactly, that the Bible is part of a broader traditional, it's a universal tradition that must be understood in this comparative fashion to be fully gotten. In Sanskrit, Ga, G-H-A, at the end of compounds signifies to strike or to kill. This is quite interesting because remember that there was a specifically sacrificial action that had the grace descending, right? So in the act of sacrifice, it was the imperium itself that killed the victim. And the reason why this is a bit complicated from a theological point of view, but it's the fact that this was the ultimate example, as killing is technically a sin in as much as it puts an end to a life, of proving, like this leap of faith, through this leap of faith, the capacity to, of course, the virtues efficient of augmenting life and expanding it through this kind, the sacrifice. It's like this polyopima, at the end of the day, the sacred duel in holy war, right? One you see also with Arjuna. The idea is that when you kill an enemy, his power, just like slaying the dragon we were saying before, proceeds into you. And not just that, but it is actually augmented, or at least having been subsumed by a greater force. This doesn't become a sum, but a sort of an exponential growth. However, this, of course, must be attained by he who is able to do so. Naturally, this defies our modern physical understanding, but it's not fully outside of the realm of actual physical possibilities. I'm not going to enter in this, but again, at some point we shall. The same goes for the compound Han, Han in Sanskrit, which means to remove the breath. So a divine act of transformation where life is reshaped through destruction. This is an incredibly deep concept because it aligns with all the things we've seen, for example, about, the Christian penitentials. Why is killing but not murdering allowed? What kind of achievement can humanity in its fallen dimension hope to get from killing? There is some, right? And that's why this is justified in certain cases, or at least by the degree it is capable of creating this further breadth of shifting it in another direction. The theology of it is a bit more complicated, but it basically gets down to this idea. The Jaiminiya Brahmana 1.68 connects the aforementioned Han compound to the ritual slaying of the sacrificial victim, symbolizing the transformation of life into divine energy. Remember, this basically sounds a bit like Ga, all right? So it's connected to it phonetically. This divine energy that emanates from the sacrifice itself naturally must be performed as aligned with the cosmic order. Otherwise, it cannot produce this. It cannot maintain and actually augment this power. Augere, by the way, and Augustus derived from Ga, because it is literally like this increase, this approaching to God in this divine elevation. So literally Augustus also derives from Ga. This is the fire of Agni, which both creates and consumes in the Vedic tradition, as seen in Gath and Gers, which mean to rub or to scrape, which specifically refer to the action sparking the sacred flame through friction. Right? Gath and Gers, connected with Ga, literally express this, the fact that the Ga emerges from this friction. This is detailed in the Satapatha Brahmana 3.4.1.2, where the fire churning ritual, the Agni Manthana, where his fiery essence emerges from the friction of divine forces, is concerned. Right? This is probably, again, the friction that bursts Agni's flame itself, akin to the Celtic knam that is connected to this etymologically and phonetically. The bone that endures, because in this sense the phoneme is actually endowed with a specific meaning. The bone that endures the grinding of time, knam, referenced in the Welsh Mabinogion as the enduring strength of heroes as bones in sacred burial mounds. This is incredibly important because the same Christian doctrine of relics derives straight from that. And we know very well, of course, that the Giles venerated in their sacred mounts the fallen heroes. I made multiple videos about the doctrine of afterlife and how a somatic element of the corpse was maintained, as opposed to maintaining a connection, however, with the second soul of man, at least in this case of the hero, that had managed to transfigure in the firmament to a degree, and that therefore maintained a connection with the body that, as you see also in the Christian tradition, if not the perishing after that, is actually endowed of that saintly aura, which is the same augmentation, the same Augustan nature, and so the presence of the Holy Ghost within that. I mean, the entire doctrine of relics is there, right? So also for people who have problem with relics, just know that that's actually the case. And it was traditionally European, Indo-European anymore. The Germanic Hauven is literally connected with this, to hew and shape through forceful motion. Literally the same language. We speak the same language all across Europe with the same identical meaning. The whole High German Nibelungenlied, stanza 231, uses Hauven to describe the forging of Siegfried's sword. Specifically, you see how radically, traumatically, violently, extremely specific, absolute, and square this entire etymology is, in line with Indo-European cosmology and theology. It all means the same freaking thing. Hauven derives from the same root, phoneme, and has to do with the friction that derives from the forging of Siegfried's sword, which, by the way, literally as a sword, finds its path in the war, just like, I don't know, Thyr's hammer / axe, which is also the same thundering bolt. Everything goes full circle. A divine act of creation through violent motion. The Big Bang, if you want, just for saying that religion and science do not, regardless of whatever we can think the Big Bang may have been in physical terms, because obviously it involves some metaphysics there, something that we definitely don't know in the moment, on simply that sort of more, lower understanding of how these things could have happened. I don't remember how the phrase was ending, but you know what I mean, is all one, right? The Slavic gnesti derives from the same root word. This means to knead or press, mirroring the meaning a divine act of molding creation through pressure. This is seen in the Polish ritual of kneading bread for offerings to Perun, the sun deity, as recorded in the medieval Slavic chronicles. As Agni's fire molds the world. Remember, the bread there in the grain, etc., derived, as we've seen, from the nether world as well. Just like Siegfried's sword had been created by the Nibelungs, that were the dwarves, right? So this force manifests across the estates, across the metaphysical order of mankind, right? In the Hellenic pantheon, this theology transforms as G, shifting to B, right? This is how linguistically proceeded, so you can follow the etymology as well. Reflecting in the process, by the way, also softening of the divine utterance, yet retaining its sacred essence, right? Because, of course, things change in concept, right? Before that in words, but still the meaning is the same. This phonetic shift in Hellenic is noted in Beeke's Etymological Dictionary of Greek, where the G to B transition is a regular feature in Hellenic's in the Hellenic adaptation of Indo-European roots. For example, the Hellenic bos, the ox, descends from the Indo-European gaus, right? And so, cow, for example, a creature of free multidirectional movement, right? Because they literally wander around, they graze, right? This is very important because literally G, it stems from the same phonetic root. It's all the same meaning, right? This represented, of course, like the herds pioneered by the Indo-European warlords that moved them across the world, right, in their conquests. This is also the ox revered in the Vedic hymns. So just like in today's sort of Hindu idea that you can't kill cows, like as God, the cow whose milk is in fact likened to the rain of celestial waters. All right, yet another chthonic symbolism that, however, as we've seen, witnesses the manifestation of divine power through literally the nutritious element of the earth that comes from God itself. The Rig Veda 4.3.10 equates the milk of God to the soma pressed during rituals, and everything comes full circle as well here. A divine nourishment flowing from the heavens themselves. The Celtic bow, the cow, carries the sanctity as well. A symbol of abundance and divine nurturing is seen in the Irish tyne bow Cuailnge, where the cow is a central figure of divine prosperity and conflict as well, of course, among Celtic cattle raiders. During also the Celtic expansions, or the Proto-Celtic people from the same dynamics that had, in fact, brought the Indo-Europeans to spread as the Ga across the world, while the Germanic Kutz and Slavic Govedo echo the bovine's sacred role in sustaining life, right? The Old Norse prose Edda, Gylfaginning 6, describes the cow Audumla as the nourisher of the first beings, a bit like the wolf, Sacklin, Romulus, and Remus. So the lowest chthonic element in the hierarchy, in that case of warrior brotherhoods, licking the cosmos into existence, literally. So this is sort of more poetic in the Old Norse prose Edda. Nevertheless, remember that it stemmed from a very specific original understanding of this. Hence also the birth of Christ in the manger, that's the same exact meaning, right? The Latin bos, obviously, you understand that these are all the same words, like they are literally the same words. I mean, people are radically obsessed with separating peoples within Europe. It's sort of the most ridiculous thing ever. The Latin bos and bovis continue this reverence. The ox is a partner in the cosmic labor of plowing the earth, its circular paths mirroring Agni's zigzag dance. The ox was used exactly to trace those boundaries that we were talking about before in the Roman foundation of cities that were sacred, of course. And so just think about how that proceeded. From the lower element that, however, contains the nature of the world, because in that sense the earth is being marked, right? And so it's as if this kin, right, earthly dimension traced itself. Virgil's Georgics 351 describes the bos as integral to sacred agricultural rites, in the same way it's labor aligning with cosmic cycles. The Hellenic ballo, to throw, and barus, heavy, trace back to gal and guru, embodying the weight and force of divine action. As you know, ballista comes from the same concept. It's the bolt that is shot, right? The catapult that literally breaks through shields. Cataballo, for example, it was exactly the same. Ballo was used in Homer's Iliad 5:304 to describe the hurling of divine spears by gods. By the way, just like thunder, paralleled in the Celtic bara, a wrathful energy noted in the Welsh triads as the fiery spirit of warriors, and the Slavic bare, a burden borne by the faithful, right? This is quite fascinating because it's as if it is actually something that you must be up to literally bear. And so an enormous potential that you have to be up to in order to unlock to begin with. This is incredibly important as a concept, by the way, which means never give up, never let go, never think that what you can do is just going to kill you eventually. It's going possibly to save and to increase your life. In Slavic folklore, bare is the weight of divine trials as well, because of course it's unlocking, say, entails justice, as seen in tales of heroes enduring Perun's tests. So it's literally like God's test, like bearing the cross itself. It's all in that, right? Until you actually do it and sacrifice everything, you can't attain divine power. The sacred fire of Agni burns brightly in the Sanskrit Agni, of course, the Latin ignis, and the Celtic Eingeal, a spark of ember that carries divine light. All right. The Latin ignis is used in Ovid's Fasti, 6:291, to describe the sacred fire of Vesta, as we well know, kindled in rituals mirroring Vedic practices as well. Again, Romanity and the Vedas are radically close, Indo-Europeanly speaking. The Agni Kunda, the Vedic fire pit, is the womb of the divine, where the priest Agni kindles the sacred flame, described in the Aitareya Brahmana 2.3 as the navel of the sacrifice, where Agni resides. This is incredibly important for a reason, because we pointed out that in Rome, the virgins, the Vestals, were exactly entrusted with Vesta's sacred fire. And this is not, of course, the Vestals are not the highest, they're the keepers of the fire, right? They're not the officiating, but in part they are. But the point is that, as we've seen, the lower element, the chthonic dimension, the waters, the she-wolf, the cow, and so on, is connected to the feminine with the telluric. And so it's very plausible that the Romans, in this sense, had even a more straightforwardly traditional understanding than the Vedas themselves, that lower dimension was the one from which the greatest force of the fire had to be drawn from. Right? Hence also Rome conquest of the world. Which the Vedas did not quite achieve, at least in the same way. Right? So this is overwhelmingly important in the history of civilization, because Romanity is the highest achievement of the Ga, as the greatest achievement in the history of mankind, of course, including, mirroring the birth of Christ. And so, again, everything adds up in that degree. This is, by the way, seen also among the Celts, by the way. For example, Eid, which is connected to Ides, which is the altar in Latin. But in the Celtic Eid, we've seen it in the video about the Aedui, which literally mean the ardent ones, means fire itself. This is found in the Irish Dinsenkas as the sacred flame of Brigid's heart. So yet the other female that is to be entrusted with this power. In the Germanic Eithane, which means to ignite. All right, so hence the connection with the female womb properly as the place of birth, right? So in the trust that you must have in the woman, as much as you are able to transfigure her as the lower element through the true divine power in your Apollonian manly stand. This is the actual meaning of the word. The Old Saxon Heliand, that we also made videos on as far as the Eastern Frankish Catholic tradition was concerned, line 4023, uses Eithane for the divine spark kindling spiritual awakening. All right, and the Germans were aware of that. The Saxons were absolutely aware of that same meaning. Right, it resonated. It's not random. It's not like Christianity separated, the Germans being something else. This is the same universal tradition perpetuating itself through the sacred fire. The Slavic Agni, by the way, is the same matrix as you understand of ignis, right, of Agni. Fire, in fact, it means shares this sanctity, a flame that purifies and transforms, regenerates, right, repristinates. The Ruthenian Primary Chronicle records Agni as central to rituals honoring Svarog, the sky god, unsurprisingly. Rituals like the Agni Stoma, where Soma is offered by Brahmins, so the priestly class. Remember that, because, again, there is all something changing in India as well, with the priests basically taking over. In Rome, you don't have that. You have the actual emperors, imperium wielders that confer to, as you see, even the Vestals in their virginal procreational potential of divine scope, the actual sacred fire used in the same rituals to manifest the imperium from God, from Jupiter Tonans. But the Agni Stoma, where the Soma is offered by Brahmins, as a ritual detailed in the Satapatha Brahmana 4241 as a 5-day rite aligning the cosmos, and the Agni Otra, a sacrifice to Agni described in the Taittiriya Samhita 153 as a daily offering to sustain divine order, find echoes in the Celtic Aithigné, a ritual kindling noted in the Senkas Mar as a druidic fire lighting ceremony, and the Slavic Ognin, fiery offerings to the gods. Do you understand? All the Indo-Europeans, right, from Rome to India, from the Slavs to the Celts, from the Germans to the Greeks, they all believe the same identical thing. Slavic chronicles describe Ognin as offerings to Perun during summer solstice rites. Right, so the magnitudinally extended level of the light and the fire. These acts are not mere ceremonies, but cosmic alignments, right, where the tortuous motion of fire bridges the mortal and the divine. And the summer solstice, obviously, being the closest to moment in which to gap the distance between God and man, at least astronomically speaking. And of course in metaphysical terms rather than merely, again, physical. Yet, there is always, a double edge to this. Like, you can't wield the imperium without risking to be fulgurated yourself. This theology also warns of the dangers of straying from divine path. All right, and so as we've seen, that weight, that power, being able to crush you the same way. In the same duel, you can lose. Right, in holy combat, you may not attain transfiguration, but being actually devoured by the forces of the underworld if you're not able to tame them, as we've seen. Think about Rome's order in that regard with Vesta's sacred fire. The Sanskrit agas, tortuous behavior or sin, and anagas, without sin, find parallels in the Hellenic agos, a profanation that disrupts the cosmic order, used in Sophocles' Antigone, line 604, to denote ritual pollution, akin to the Celtic ag, that is strife seen in the Irish cat Maige Tuired as the chaotic force opposing divine harmony, in the Germanic ag, fear of dread of divine retribution, so from which agar like coward. All right, this is incredibly important because it's not much just the aforementioned fire manifesting the world going basically astray from you who has to wield it, so it will go somewhere else if it does, otherwise it will come back to heaven. But there is also properly the unfitness, the unworthiness, right, that is basically the entire criterion revolving around who does officiate the rite and who does connect with God in a sacred fashion. The Old Norse Havamal, stanza 94, uses ag to describe the fear of divine judgment for oath breaking, for example. Consider that aga, for example, or arga, is incredibly well known as properly an insult in Germanic. It means coward, and it obviously was connected with the incapacity of, say, taking an oath in the sense to go fight or die, right? Because that's what a real warrior does. Like, a real warrior either wins or dies. There isn't like a middle ground, right? Naturally, in humanity there is, but in divine principle there isn't. The Slavic hrik, that is sin, error as well, underscores this universal Indo-European concern with maintaining harmony through righteous motion. If you don't, you're sinning, hence the entire concept of sin, also in a metaphysical sense, or in a cosmological sense, better, because the former has much deeper implications. But here, given that, as you understand, Indo-European phonetics follows properly cosmological movement, basically not aligned, as we were saying before, with cosmic harmony, right? And by falling out of that, you fall out of grace. It's only on you, right? The Slavic book of Veles, tablet 7b, links Greek to violations of divine law itself, requiring purification rites. The divine messenger, so in this sense, the same Holy Ghost and Victoria, etc., the Angiras in Sanskrit, a luminous priest of fire described in the Rig Veda 1062.5 as the mediator between gods and humans, which is basically the hero, the sacred royal, the sun, right, becomes the Hellenic, surprise, surprise, you know that, angelos, the angel, the angelic herald used in the New Testament, Matthew 1:20 for divine messengers, and the Latin angelus, a bearer of divine tidings. It's literally the same, meaning again, Indo-European iconography throughout all the ancient world is univocally representing this everywhere. The Celtic angel, an angel found in the Irish annals of the Four Masters as a divine protector, and the Germanic engel, of course, share the same role. You understand that the word is literally the same in all these European languages, used in the Old English dream of the Rood, line 9, for celestial beings. This is extremely important because these are the transfigured heroes as well. They're the Gaelic, guys that were, the mortal remains were, at least the somatic remains, were not dead, actually, were buried into the mounds, just like, the Kurgans of the Sarmatians. Who are the angels, right? It would be great if there were more people actually knowing what angels are as opposed to seeing them everywhere without knowing anything about theology, really. They are the actual heroes that earned a place in the firmament, winning with their second soul over the second death. Again, I made multiple videos about the afterlife, explaining how that works. So winning a specific place in the firmament and entering the ranks of God. And so being able to win, to be active essentially in the in up to the end time, and partaking divine action in the struggle and informing the world in the meanwhile. Hence the angel that descends into the world, right, and that announces, that interacts with men in the Bibles of the Old Testament. The angel is not even necessarily meant to be a positive figure, right? Aside from the fact that the Saint Lucifer basically was one of them, but probably these people also copulate with humans at some point. The giants, other lower figures, chthonic figures, at least that, remember, are always provided with some divine power, are actually the product of this. And because these guys have partially made it to come close, you see the angel, it's all from that sense. Those were the guys who had properly made it into heaven, hence the movement, right, from, in this case, they could be suspended in different worlds, right, but they had literally made it through, right, this cosmic atmosphere, this in between, as leaders, as warriors, as commanders, and just as also a fallen element from the perennial absolute, right. You find in the Slavic Angio the same celestial weight. This is noted in Angio, in the Serbian epic poetry, as guardians of sacred sites, right? All rooted in Ang, the multidirectional movement of divine will. Essentially, the Serbian way to it is literally just the mount is guarded by that kind of angelic figure that watches in part all and is connected, as we've seen, through to these mortal spoils that are still alive as a reliquary, and that inspire, that appear in version to all those who go there praying and sort of entering these mystical experiences. This is obvious. The Bible is replete with this, but it's all part of the same, also universal tradition. The theology of Ag speaks of perilous motion as well. Again, these forces are not to be kidded with. They're not merely positive. They are what you make them be. And so when you sin, you also, as we've seen, partially deflect. You fall out of grace. But in this sense, you also cause yourself a trauma. It's as if this fire burnt you rather than revivified you, the opposite direction. And so this perilous motion is present in the tortuous path. Hence also the difficulty to wield this, right? That can lead to sin or danger, as in the Sanskrit aga, which means dangerous, or agaya, to threaten, right? The Rig Veda 786.4 uses aga to describe malevolent forces opposing divine order. As we've seen, the angels can do that themselves. The Hellenic akos, A-K-H-A-O-S, anguish, right, that also has the same etymology, found in Homer's Odyssey 716 as the sorrow of divine punishment, right? And the Latin ager, torment, right, used in Cicero's De Natura Deorum 390 for divine affliction, reflects this, as do the Celtic ach, that is a cry of distress, which I presume is literally ach, like also in German, for example, which means ouch, right, kind of, oh, oi, noted in the Welsh Godwdin as warriors lament in battle when you are broken and you have lost, and there is this acknowledgement, right, of the divine wrath that has fallen on you as you have been smashed by the other guy's imperium, right? And the Slavic age, a burden of sorrow, right, in a pretty plenary, disappointing and desolating fashion, right? Think about Roland dying, crying for his Durandal that he breaks, he smashes, interrupting that guy itself, right? As it had been definitely quite much of a mean of the divine. Those Carolingian paladins were supposed to be the angels of the situation, as Charlemagne was King David himself. In fact, Slavic laments recorded in 10th century chronicles use age for the grief of divine disfavor. Yet the divine also offers redemption through gam, the G-A-M, the sacred act of going, whether in pilgrimage for expiation, for example. It's obviously a spiritual path, but also love or community. We'll see this because actually these phonemes are not separated from one another. There is kam, for example, which is the K, the hard C is by far the most important and fundamental phoneme in Indo-European languages, and the same one of cosmos, of so many sort of properly defining, and it has to do with love itself, right? So there is an idea that there is always a possibility, right, to redeem yourself. As long as you're still alive, you make it. It's actually a dramatic picture, right? That this ideas did not stem from a world where, in this sense, love was ruling because, just indulgence was ruling. Quite the radical opposite of the same. In fact, this is the point. God's love can turn into God's wrath, but it has to do with this internal potential that you have to unlock, right? To actually achieve world domination. This is what the Kama, at the end of the day, is all about. So the Sanskrit gamin, one who goes everywhere, used in the Mahabharata 139.8 for ascetics wandering divine pursuit, which naturally has to do also with essentially the errant knight, with the crusade and more. And Ganesha, a leader of divine troops, remember that, because that's exactly the point. This is the holy host, right? The ranks of angels, as we've seen this sacred war bands described in the Ganesha Purana 1.32 as the guide of souls through obstacles, which literally means like troops that storm castles, right? Finding echoes, in fact, in the Hellenic Baino, to walk, used in, this is also in German, for example, used in Pindar's Pythian Odes for 222 for heroic journeys, and the Latin basis, so literally basis, a foundation for sacred steps, right? Remember that, because this is the foundation of the sacred perimeters as well, as a base, literally. Remember the omphalon of the world, Delphi. It's the same thing we said before about the omphalon, the vomb of the earth, right? As a fixed center, in that case of the Dorian world domination. Vitruvius De Architectura 313 uses bases for the sacred foundations of temples, for example. So obviously it's not merely an engineering, architectural text, but it literally refers to this in the traditional concept of properly what had to be at the foundation of the sacred itself. The Celtic gab, G-A-B-H, to take or go, seen in the Irish Ogham inscriptions as a term for divine quests. In the Germanic gangan, aligned with this, used in the Gothic Bible, Mark 6:8, for example, for missionary travels, as does the Slavic goni, which stands for pursue, pursuit, found in Bulgarian folklore for chasing divine visions, for example. So literally ecstatic trances, all reflecting the divine journey, right? Which is also a providential one, as you understand. You're able to expand your sight. You're able to go places that others haven't. And it's not a material, simply a spatial. It is also a spatial one, but through layers, to metaphysical layers that transcend our sort of fixed, sort of empty and amorphous, say, sense of space otherwise. Because remember that the form is metaphysical, right? And so also in geometry, there is a concept of this kind. In fact, the Atlantic is a geometric painting. The same concept, say, of temple architecture is all one with that, but because what is inscribed in it is properly sacred in ways that transcend any other dimension, right? The voice of the divine resounds in Ga, which also means to sing, a motion of the throat that carries joy and lament, right? Gaulian, for example, we've seen it in Longobarд history. It was probably like a celebration, and literally they spoke like this, they sang like this. The Sanskrit Gayatri, a sacred verse, the Rig Vedas 3:62-10, most revered hymn chanted at dawn, so at the rise of sacred fire of the sun, parallels the Celtic Gaeth, a chant noted in the Irish Augre na Nexus as druidic incantations, because this was sung at dawn before battle, right? So in the moment in which that imperium would manifest, the Germanic Goyen stands to proclaim. The Old Norse Skald's Kapermal uses Goyen for skaldic poetry praising gods, for example. The Slavic Gayati, to sing, continues this, a vocal offering to the gods. You see, by the way, how the older sources from the Norse, the Slavs that we understand later, of course, have maintained the same principle, but they are already declined to the Middle Ages time, where the same peoples had basically given up the idea properly of that you could win, you could save yourself, right? This already basically from 1,000 years had been lost. This is incredibly important also in historical perspective, because it's not like this words we said before always meant the same thing, at least in the context in which they were used. The Matrix did, right? But that's what we're doing here, reconstructing what was also the primal original meaning. Serbian epic songs use Gayati for ritual chants to Jarilo. The Gari, to gargle or roar, as in the Sanskrit Garita and Hellenic Gerio, used in Aeschylus' Persians, line 107, for divine oracles, finds its echo in the Celtic Gairm. A call, seen in the Scottish Carmina Gadelica as ritual invocations, and the Slavic Gorieti, to speak loudly, used in Ruthenian chronicles for prophetic utterances, all expressions of the divine voice moving through the cosmos. the prophecies of the seers, of the oracles, obviously were providential in the original meaning of the term. That is to say, from the Latin etymology, provideo, so to see in advance, which means the capacity of predicting the future, because as we've seen, the future is not subject to fate, but is actually decided by the same leader, by the same visos, who sees. Wisdom comes from that, the ability to see, because just like through the eye of Ra, what you see is what molds the world in your own image, just like what Alexander did in his conquest of the universe. The bovine gauss, the cow, is a sacred wonder itself, as we've seen. Its milk a celestial gift, as we've already said in the Vedic Ga and the Hellenic bulls. The Homeric hymn to Hermes, line 18, describes bulls as sacred to Apollo, for example. That, as you know, also think about the Apollo shepherd, right? Guides literally the sheep, which is also symbolism that, of course, Christianity immediately adopted in the wake of this Catholic symbolism. But the cow itself, right? Its milk nourishing divine rights being strictly connected with that. The Celtic bo, the Germanic kutz, and Slavic govedo share this reverence. Their pastures, gavia, bosque, sacred spaces where the divine nurtures life. The Old Irish lebor na widre describes bow pastures as sacred to the goddess Danu. The act of immersion as well, ga, plunging into celestial waters. As we've seen, this is the primal meaning of the fire that is able to literally part the waters itself, as Agni's birthright, as apāṃ-napāt noted in the Rig Veda, as is emergent from the cosmic flood mirrored in the Hellenic bapto, literally gave life to baptize, right? Baptism exactly symbolize this. Essentially, you emerge from the waters that, in this sense, are sacred waters, and grab it with that divine potential. You come out of them transfigured by the fire of faith. This is literally what we went through, right? And just think about what it means to be baptized. This is, of course, the same term used, by the way, in the Hellenic Septuagint, Exodus 12:22, for ritual purification. You have the Latin baptisma, a sacred cleansing. Obviously, as you understand, what we would like to stress here is that the literal root is the same, because we've seen that in Greek you pass from G to B, so this would be gapto, right? Not bapto, but eventually that's how it went. Latin acquired this term from Hellenic largely, but similar, changes could have occurred linguistically, but in baptisma. Tertullian's De Baptismo, for one, links baptisma to divine renewal. Needless to say, the Celtic bath, to drown, found in the Welsh Black Book of Carmarthen as a metaphor for spiritual immersion, and the Slavic bati, to plunge, used in Polish rituals for river purifications, echo this purification. All right. Consider that the water is in continuous motion, and so in and of itself, it represents the loose kind of power that springs out of the unmoved mover, so in the lower nature. But you come out of it as, in fact, more unitary, right? And that's the actual meaning of these reinvigorating waters. That's, again, the same thing about Moses, about the Romulus and Remus. We've seen the suckling element as well, the sacred milk. You have there all in the same, in the foundation of Rome. I made an entire video about Levy's version on that, which is a pure hymn to imperial Catholic and Indo-European tradition. The theology of Gur speaks of lifting with a fort. This is also connected with it. As we remember before, it is connected with the Sanskrit guru, which is, in this sense, a heavy, honorable teacher. You have to bear his teaching. It's not easy. This is actually very relatable. Once you're acquainted with tradition, you understand that everything that happens to you is your fault. To some degree, it can be devastating. I think that some people would break, especially in today's mental frailty that is becoming literally a pandemic among the youth. They're fleeing in terror from this concept, but it's also the same. It's a blessing to receive this burden. And this is literally what Christ's crucifixion incarnates. The concept of guru, again, how many times you have heard the term, but you had no idea what this actually meant. This is described in the Upanishads, Mundaka 1-12, as the guide to cosmic truth, all right, paralleled by the Hellenic Baris and Latin Gravis, all right. So remember, there is always a truth, there is always a cosmic center and a path to the divine. That does not differ in the ultimate destination. It differs only by the degree of which you have fallen, and so you are not in access with that, all right? But it all leads to the same direction, if undertaken, of course. Seneca's Epistles 108:22 uses gravis, so like heavy. This is applied, as you know, also to armor in Latin, so for the weight of divine wisdom. The Spoliopima were actually part of this too, because they were literally like the panoply of the enemy and your own that you had to be able to wield, like in learning how to sustain that and realizing that that human, say that fallen pain is but an illusion in front of the power you can achieve. The Celtic Gövar noble, seen in the Welsh Mabinogion as the honor of kings, and the Slavic gorjety to rise, used in Ukrainian folklore for spiritual ascent, reflect this elevation. The secretive gu, spelled G-U-H, to hide, as in the Sanskrit guhya, mystic, noted in the Bhagavad Gita 11.1, as hidden divine knowledge, finds echoes in the Celtic Veit, hidden work used in the Irish Book of Leinster for Druidic mysteries, and the Slavic gubiti to conceal. As we explained, this path traced by sacred fire, by the thunder bolt, is not immediately, let's say, it is actually one of the single most striking, in fact, lightning elements, but it is something that we don't fully grasp because of our limit, because of the chaos that is unfolding. So our own limitation rather than the clarity of it, right? So this actual manifestation of the divine is hidden by our own sin. And to embrace it means, again, to take on your cross and actually getting there, passing through the tempest to the elements in between. Croatian tales use gubiti for hiding sacred relics, which is also not, in fact, random. It's not just about hiding, but specifically something sacred. The relics, something precious that must, in this sense, be hidden. There must be a path in order to be able to reach that. Naturally, it's a metaphor, but it still represents the metaphysics of it, and that's why relics are enshrined, right, in Catholic tradition. The rapid ger, to drip or throw, as in Galati, flows into the Hellenic ballo, because as we've seen, that would be actually gallo, right? And this is actually the same root word for diabolon, diabolus in Latin, for example, used in Jerome's Vulgate, Job 1:6, for the adversarial divine force, a divine adversary who disrupts the cosmic order. So somebody who actually has power but uses for the negative purpose and falls unavoidably, but still can carry other people with him, right, if they are on his trail. And this is incredibly important as far as the direction that we were saying before really goes. So remember, there isn't such a thing like an antagonistic force to God, right? There is just people who think that they can attain the highest divinity, but without having fully entailed how to achieve that and going astray and losing everything in the process. The Celtic Gale to cast, seen in the Ogham tract as a term for spell casting, and the Slavic Gality to pour, used in Ruthenian rituals for libations to Mokosh, continued this theme. The act of swallowing, gur, is a sacred ingestion of the soma, as in the Sanskrit girati and the Hellenic bibrosko, used in Aristophanes' Frogs, line 52, for consuming divine offerings. So it's literally drinking, ingesting. This is mirrored in the Celtic gulp, to gulp, noted in the Irish Senkas Mar as ritual drinking of sacred brews. So literally drinking, right? From bibere, for example, in Latin, which means to drink, and the Slavic glethati, to swallow. All right, so this is particularly important because, of course, it mimics the ritual, which still, it's today, the Catholic priest drinks Christ's blood. And this is exactly the mystery of this path, right? That is evidently not a mere sort of organic biological function. It is a metaphysical action, right, of those who still officiate the rite, just like from millennia. So think about that next time you go to church. Belarusian folklore uses glethati for consuming sacred waters as well. The grasping grah, Grah, to seize, as in Garba, the vomb described in the Chandogya Upanishad 6.8.2 as the cosmic vomb of creation, as the inners, the Sancta Sanctorum, finds its parallel in the Hellenic Delphus, which is exactly what the Temple of Delphus is about. Is the omphalos of the world, is the vomb of the world, it's from which the Dorian race will spring out to take over the world. And the Latin gremium, which is used in Virgil's Aeneid 6.595 for the sacred embrace of the earth, sacred spaces of creation. This is important because it witnesses properly like the same grave, like the same properly the embrace again of the chronic dimension, for at least the bodily remains, that would not make it to fully transfigure the entire being as God, like Romulus did, for example. In this case, in the Aeneid, I will stop citing the individual thing because I think this is at the very beginning of the Aeneid, so it's like 30, not 595. But it refers to Anchises, all right. The Celtic Gabba, to take, seen in the Irish Dins and Kas and seizing divine blessings, and the Slavic Grabiti, to seize, used in Serbian epic poetry for capturing divine favor, share this divine act. This is incredibly important because, as you understand, it reconnects with also the chthonic element that must be transfigured, and that must become, again, back part of the plenitude of the system. Finally, you have the communal gra, to gather. So there is always this root dedicated to the zippe rather than the comitatus. So this is incredibly fascinating because it shows how everything about the divine path is actually connected with the earth ultimately. As it is in Grama, village, noted in the Atharva Veda, as a sacred community under divine protection, resonating in the Hellenic agora and Latin Grex in actual etymology, used in Cicero's De Republica, line 39, congregatus. Here the examples I'm giving are very sort of generic, right? You see how in the coin, that's a passage about Scipio, for example, but it speaks of the people and the fact that it was congregated. What does that mean, right? It literally is part of this. They are gathering to go somewhere, right? Which is exactly what this root ag is actually about. And for the sacred assembly of citizens, in fact, echoed by the Celtic gre, which is a herd seen in the Welsh triads as sacred cattle gatherings. This is incredibly important because, as we've seen, the same Latins had a eminently pastoral Indo-European semi-nomadic background in etymology, made an entire video explaining how all the Roman magistruses' names are actually have a very specific Indo-European metaphysical meaning. The Slavic Greda, a group used in Polish chronicles for communal rites, or reflecting the divine assembly of souls. All right. So what do you think about this? We're just at the beginning. This is just an appetizer. It's about this specific meaning and this specific idea of this root word. It is fundamentally what we're going to look at through different lenses. As you understand, the comparative method is crucial. You cannot see. I started in this series exactly also for showing my analytical, critical, and methodological capacity, right? The fact that people do not believe in the existence of this traditional body doctrine is the measure by which they are completely de-habituated in a moral and scientific sense to study. Remember that, right? These things that we just stated are actually true in as much as you can confront their meaning shared with one another. And you understand how aside from the variations within the same etymology, the semantic is very rich, right? It goes in different directions, but it's part of this broader concept and principle. And this is just a little part of the whole, right? So we will have to go much more in depth. There is an astonishingly large amount of Indo-European theology, cosmology, religion to browse. We're getting there. We're going to smash the hell out of everything. We're going to literally take over through that, right? And let's congregate, right? Let's literally strike in the cosmic chaos to bring order, right, through divine manifestation. If we wield the Imperium, we can really make this difference. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.